Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
Hello, Mr. Forsdyke. How you doing?
I'm Ms. Richardson. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So the day's finally comes to the day that we've, day we've all been waiting for. It's kind of like it almost feels as if it's been, like waiting for a baby to be born, isn't it? It's almost been that long.
The big anticlimax, really, in some ways, isn't it?
Yeah, the day is here. So, Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, had his budget yesterday. So come on, Stu, for the benefit of the two people that are watching that don't know, what did he say about stamp duty?
Yeah, so if anybody in the world doesn't know, so he's extended the period by 3 months for properties up to 500 and a further 3 months, the end of September, for properties up to 250. So the cliff edge, so to speak, has been pushed back. Is it less steep?
No, I mean, the thing is, we've just got two cliff edges now, haven't we?
Yeah.
We've got one in June, one at the end of May, and one at the end of summer. Because the August bank holiday is going to be a zinger, isn't it? Nobody's going away then, are they?
I tell you, the real difficult part for us as a practice is going to be that we've obviously granted holiday for those periods already. So where we had like a blanket ban on holiday for the end of March, of course, now it's a bit like, does anybody want to take some holiday? Because there's a hell of a lot being built up, unfortunately.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, Stu? And I mean, because my LinkedIn feed has just been packed with people on stamp duty. And from what I can see, and we'll certainly come back to the holiday point, I mean, there seems to be, this is totally unscientific, I might add, there seem to be sort of three camps as far as the response to the stamp duty land tax holiday is concerned. Generally firms, people at the top of firms, people running organisations, be it firms or estate agents in particular, have said, yeah, good thing. We can carry on, squeezing this and supporting the economy, to be completely fair, for another 6 months. Some people, yawn, who'll remain nameless, have just used it as an excuse to say, oh, conveyancers will be slow again. Oh, yeah, whatever. And the sort of what I might call the squeezed middle, the conveyancers in the middle who aren't at the top of firms, who are charged with getting all this stuff out the door, I think have greeted it with general dismay. I think that they seem to be the three attitudes, the three approaches to it, really. So, what's your feeling about how your staff might have greeted the news, Stu?
I think it was expected, though, wasn't it? That's the difference. I think, the report from the Times and Sky that sort of, if you want to call it, leaked.
Yeah.
What was going to happen has sort of diluted people's reaction to it, maybe. Obviously, staff were looking forward to having that break, if you want to call it that, or that let up on pressure. Of course, there still now is that pressure still for the end of the month, because there's this sort of innuendo that all of a sudden we've all now got our feet up again. Well, don't forget, people have already exchanged and people have already made arrangements for the end of March.
Yeah.
So law firms in general are now going to be extremely busy, on the run up to the end of March for obvious reasons. And then, it's going to extend beyond that, isn't it? So it's a difficult one for staff, isn't it? Because, if you're sitting there sort of doing the conveyancing on the tools, so to speak, running these files, you've got another period of time. You had light at the end of the tunnel. And of course, that tunnel's got a lot longer. But, we must all concede now that will be the end date at the end of June and the end of September. So the light is still there. And unfortunately, it's a case of battling on for this extended period of time.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, Stu, actually. And I've got to say, mate, you are the first person I've heard to say that, this absolute sort of fixed belief that, the end of September will be the day. I can actually see just another great sort of tidal wave of lobbying during September, possibly even the night before the threshold's due to come back in. Because people are just going to be, today will seem like, years ago, and people will be saying, oh, well, we can't have a cliff edge. I agree. I don't think he'll do it again. But what I also think is there were lots of people lobbying for really, really wholesale root and branch review, actually of the tax system generally, but in particular, those of us interested in property. You know, lots of people were suggesting, you know, root and branch changes of stamp duty land tax. And I have to say, you know, and I don't want to look like a predictor after the event, but I could never, ever see that happening in the midst of a global pandemic. He was never, ever going to do anything radical or different in the midst of a global
I'm sure
pandemic.
Everybody agrees that it needs radical reform. I don't think anybody's of a different kind of opinion. You know, it needs radical reform. However, as you say, that's never going to happen now, is it? He's never going to introduce that radical reform in the middle of a global crisis, is he? So
No.
I think what happened is what we all expected, and you know, we could all come up with better ideas or other suggestions, but realistically, none of them were ever going to happen, were they?
No, I mean, you know, I admire people for, you know, putting their head above the parapet and making suggestions, but I always had and would continue, I have to say, to have a deep unease about suggestions that were really just, in my opinion, too vague to be credible. You know, either the stamp duty land tax holiday should be extended if you've got a mortgage offer in principle, or if you've instructed your solicitor, well, or your conveyancer, I should say. Well, you know, that just wasn't a point in time that was possible to identify. And what really would have concerned me about that is that type of suggestion actually, in reality, Stu, that would have made the firms, the indemnity insured firms, the gatekeepers for the revenue. It would have been up to the firms to say, yes, we confirm we're instructed. And I just really, you know, had a great unease.
I completely agree with you on this one. I know there's a lot of people were advocating those sort of scenarios, i.e., you know, you've instructed your lawyers, you've got a mortgage offer in place. But for me, they're not black and white circumstances. You know, I just envisage getting hundreds of people ringing or emailing me saying, I'd like to instruct you, please. And would I then ever hear again? You know, they've completed a few forms, but you know, that could be the end of it for ages. So for me, it had to be one or the other, exchange or completion. I personally would have rather it was exchange, because you could have then staggered the completion dates. So other parts of the industry, such as maybe removal companies, for example, wouldn't have been so burdened. But, you know, realistically, it had to be black and white. Otherwise, you know, it's us taking the risk on again. So exchange or completion would have been the only way forward for me.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So, Stu, let's talk about an area where, to be completely fair, you and I might sort of, or disagree is an overstatement, but in terms of, you know, we're just coming at it from different perspectives. Because clearly, you know, I don't particularly feel that right now is the time to be talking about, you know, the big strategic things that people at the top of law firms should be doing. There's loads of things we all agree that people at the top of law firms should be doing, and, you know, the conveyancing process in general. But I have to be quite honest and say what does concern me, and I'm sure, to be fair, you and other people in your position, but it is just the pressure on frontline conveyancing staff, which is now going to continue. I mean, I was liaising with somebody yesterday in that position whose quote was, "Oh God, you know, it's all very well, but this is just," and I quote, "prolonging the agony." And I do think that, and I was seeing on LinkedIn and so on, you know, people were actually counting down the days, saying, "Oh, you know, only another X days to the end of March," and you've already alluded to it, Stu, but I think, you know, what should law firms be doing now? What, you know, to try to help ease the burden for their staff? Because I completely accept that there's realistic and there's not realistic, but I still think firms should be trying to help alleviate these pressures.
The big problem is the limited amount of time. If we knew this was for a period of 2 years, it's totally different.
Yeah.
You cannot expect law firms to make radical changes, invest significant amounts of money, when we might only be talking, you know, 3 months, maybe 6 months. You know, it's not, you know, not something that can physically be done. In terms of looking after the workload that you have, again, because it's so sporadic, it's not like other business whereby, or other industries where maybe you enter into a contract and you're guaranteed that you're going to have X amount of matters and generate X amount of revenue. You know, you can borrow on the back of it and so on and so forth. But with our industry, the volume of matters that we take on, can massively peak and trough from one month to another. So planning for that at the top end of a law firm is extremely difficult. And of course, you might take on a matter today that could go abortive tomorrow, or it could take 6 months, or it could take 2 months. We don't know when you take that matter on. So planning is really, really, really difficult. I think in terms of law firm advice, having a new business department that monitor the intake of work, where it comes down, and the work type is really important, so that you can try and distribute that equally amongst your staff. We do that here, so a remortgage, for example, wouldn't be the equivalent of a leasehold purchase transaction. So we try and distribute the work so it's more equal and applicable to teams and the volumes of support that they have. So I think evaluating the work's really careful, and generally sort of checking in with your staff and your case handlers, fee earners, to make sure that everything's okay. And of course, when they're at home, it's even more difficult.
I mean, that's the thing in particular, and that's one of the things that concerns me, because people are just chugging away at home, and the line between, I think, work and home life is become incredibly blurred. And the clue is in the title. I mean, it is working at home. Most people aren't sitting up sort of watching Homes under the hammer till lunchtime. Quite the contrary. And I do think that checking in thing's really important. I wanted us just to reflect, Stu, on what people at the top of law firms, given the constraints you've mentioned, could be doing to support their staff. And as you say, something as straightforward as checking in on workload. Employers do have a responsibility for the mental health of their staff. And as you say, and quite frankly, particularly maybe more junior members of staff, they are often not going to feel able to say, I've got too much or I can't cope. And so I think that audit point that you made is very, very salient, is really, really important. If a member of staff has just got so many files open in their name, and it's very easy to work that out, then you don't have to be physically with them to work that out. Well, as you say, you can perhaps stop the workflow for a little while to help them, to help them catch up.
I think it's a double-edged sword. I think from an employer's perspective, an employee's perspective, it's a different scenario, isn't it? We have all got to understand that we are going through an event in our industry that there's never been anything like it before. So it is unprecedented. And of course, law firms would have planned for this to conclude at the end of March. Okay, so I, for one, won't be critical of other firms in certain circumstances, because what can you do? There's a deadline, a holiday that ends at the end of March. You make your planning, you recruit your staff for this period, and the goalposts have changed. So there is limited amounts you can do, but evaluating that work, trying to spread the work between your employees. There's also other things that you can do. There's the outsourcing route, exploring whether more support can be given to your guys by outsourcing parts of work. There are lots of companies now that do it in different disguises, from sort of reception right through to sort of actual parts of the conveyancing transaction, whether that be new business and quoting, whether it be post-completion, or even aspects of the actual conveyancing case itself.
Yeah.
So there is out there that you can bring in, albeit you've always got to bear in mind that when you run a business, you don't make decisions in a day to day, you don't make plans daily, but that's what we've almost been forced to do now. Rightly or wrongly, the situation we're all in, it's a daily changing scenario. You've got to bear in mind, we haven't actually been, this has not been going on for a year yet. We've had a period where we had Brexit. Okay, things were buoyant after Brexit. January, February, March were good. Okay, April, May were horrific in terms of law firms' intake of work. Yes, transactions are still proceeding, but intake of work are horrific. June and July, things got better. But when you're sitting there in August and September, you're thinking, well, the market's buoyant because people couldn't do anything from a few months back. You're not there particularly thinking it's going to be buoyant for the next 6 months. So, making plans is not easy. And you've got to bear in mind that from a supply and demand point of view, the demand for property is so high, and there's so many transactions that are going through. Actual having the personnel to deal with those again is very difficult. Are there enough people within our industry to cope with the amount of work that there is? And the answer is probably not, no. But how can you then counteract that by training people or bringing people in?
I don't think firms have got enough. Firms clearly haven't got enough time to recruit and train properly to cover the current situation that we're in. I think that's a given. I do, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I suspect quite a few conveyancers, Stu, are sort of busy jumping ship and moving firms and being promised the earth. And one thing I would particularly, and this sounds awful, but I'm old enough to be most people's mum, so I do feel sort of able to say it. But one of the things that I think more junior colleagues need to reflect on if they are thinking about jumping ship, and I can say this from bitter experience, is that the grass often isn't greener. And I do think if somebody's thinking about leaving their current job, there might be perfectly valid reasons for doing that. But you do need to look very carefully at what it is you've got now in terms of your whether it's your role, what you're doing, does it fit in with your family life, what's your employer like, all of those things. It's not, it's the big picture. And I would urge conveyancers, the coal-faced conveyancers who are just so stressed, other firms are recruiting because they're in the same position as your firm.
Exactly.
And they are going to promise you the earth. And I've got to be brutal here, Stu. And again, I'm only saying it from, as I say, experience, really. But I can quite frankly see and envisage that a lot of staff will jump ship now, being promised the earth by conveyancing firms, probably much more significant salary that they're on now. But I suspect in a year's time we'll be seeing a lot of younger conveyancers realizing how cyclical this business is. And if you've been more than 2 years in a job and you've got your employment rights, there's a lot to be said for that, because I can promise people if the backside drops out the market in 12 months time, the people that jump ship for a bigger salary now are going to be looking at the door. They're going to be laid off.
We've had that here. We've had people here that have left the practice and gone to work elsewhere, and everything you're saying is exactly correct. People are forgetting again, and I repeat that this is a once in a lifetime kind of, well, we hope it is anyway, scenario that nobody could have pre-planned for. And during this period, which is what now 11 months, of which 2 months nothing happened, there was no foresight, nothing to rely on. You can't pre-plan for it.
No.
And you're exactly right. Lots of firms are recruiting at the moment because they are so busy. And if the market did crash, undoubtedly it will drop. I certainly wouldn't want to be one of the people that have recently joined a new firm on a high salary, because guess what? Guess who you might make redundant if you have to do that?
Yeah, exactly.
If the market does crash.
Well, the thing is, Stu, and again, I don't want to keep rabbiting on about age, but I had literally just qualified with the property crash in the early 90s, and guess who got made redundant? I trained for a job, I'd stayed in property, I'd just started my sort of dream job in the town I wanted to work in, the city I wanted to work in, and I was made redundant. I mean, I was lucky enough then to be able to get another job straight away, but that redundancy right at the beginning of my career, Stu, was it just coloured everything. Everything I've done since has been driven by that one experience right at the beginning of my career. And I'd like to bet there'll be a whole ton of people looking at this who don't know yet that they're going to be in that situation.
No, I think if you've not sort of gone through a recession and stuff like that, then your mindset's different. But there's a couple of things, isn't there? You know, like we say, the grass isn't always greener on the other side. Realistically, firms that make promises of large salaries doing less work, let's take a step back. Doing not much work for a large salary, that's not really going to work, is it? It's not going to be sustainable. If you're promised that, maybe there's something amiss.
It's not going to happen.
But
It's
also
that age-old cliche, isn't it? If something sounds too good to be true, it almost invariably is.
But let's also maybe take a step back. I mean, I've had a few friends of mine recently that have sort of got terminal illnesses. I've got two, and although we're going through this difficult period, I think we do have to reflect that it could be worse. We could be within industries such as retail or travel, events, that people are losing their jobs. Companies are going bust. There is a flip side to this. I don't want to come across as one of these constant moaners. Oh God, the stamp duty is being extended. Oh God, oh God. Yes, it is extremely difficult. And yes, we are facing criticism that is totally unjust. And in some cases, laughable, literally laughable. And it does show how uneducated some people sometimes are, that, everything is down to the conveyancer. Again, we sort of read about it daily now, that the whole world's coming to conveyancers are slow. Well, actually, how much slower is it than it's ever been before? It's not any significant difference. Yes, things are slower, but then so is everything in life. It's not just bloody conveyancing, it's everything in life is slower at the moment. Not to mention all the third parties we deal with.
Well, I just it's so difficult. There, Stu, the one thing that's not slower is some people's willingness to criticise.
No, that's very true, isn't it? Very, very, very true. But we have this constant sort of battle that we are working harder, longer, and getting criticised for it. So I do feel people's frustrations, and it is the most challenging time ever to be a conveyancer because of these kind of scenarios. The challenge is not necessarily doing the work, it's the volumes of work, the time constraints we've got to do it within, the lack of sort of pre-planning for this position, which is nobody's fault, and then we get criticised for it every 5 minutes as well. But there you go. So
what firms I think do need to address, challenging though it is, I mean, I do want to come back to this, what should firms do? And I know the planning from the top is difficult. I absolutely accept and recognise that. But, firms could and should be making sure that particularly their remote staff, but all staff are getting a degree of support, a check-in every week, a Zoom every week to give staff at home who haven't got the opportunity to walk down the corridor and ask a question, the opportunity to ask questions on tricky files. I mean, psychologically, that can be very difficult. If you can't just move through the difficult files, they then become very stressful. And of course, this most basic of questions, which is perhaps, maybe the point we'll conclude on, Stu, but, there's a stamp duty holiday, there's a holiday for everybody involved, except the conveyancers, really. And, I was, again, this colleague, I was swapping messages with yesterday, they haven't actually taken a day off since the beginning of the first lockdown, which is now nearly, just nearly a year away. They've got 38 days holiday owing. They've bought back, the firm has bought back some of the holidays, so they have over 40 days. Well, most people only get 20 to 25 days, so they've basically got 2 years worth of holiday accruing. Well, that's not sustainable. And if at the very least, firms, if they're making that much money because people are sitting on their backsides working for 17 hours a day, well, they could do a buyback of holiday, because people are never going to be able to take it all. But people are going to have to be allowed to take holiday this summer. And the one thing that firms could be planning for now, and I don't accept that they can't do this, they're going to have to plan now for their staff to take holiday, between now and September. Some members of staff won't want to. And they still need to be looked after. But, firms are going to have to manage fairly, and it's difficult, but that's what HR teams are for. They're going to have to manage that holiday entitlement.
Sure. I mean, personally, it's a strange point I hear you make, because for me, other than potentially the last week or the last 2 weeks before the deadline, I don't see, how you can really restrict your staff from having a holiday, because not only do you need to sort of worry about their well-being, but equally, as you've just said, if you restrict that holiday, you've got people having double the amount of their normal allowance to half the amount of time. I mean, the back end of 2021, you won't have anybody available. Everyone's going to be on holiday.
Yeah.
So
and that's got to be managed.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's the choice. Because
you say that, Stu, but as I say, and it's this, people at the top of firms trying to, just get on with the day to day, and staff, thinking, oh, I've got too much to do, I'm not going to take my holiday. I mean, that conversation has got to be opened up. Law firm managers have got to be saying to their staff, right, you've got a ridiculous amount of holiday. What are we going to do? How are we going to manage this fairly? Let's have a fair discussion across the firm about it. It can't just be ignored. Because how aggrieved are people going to feel at the end of 2021 when they've accrued 40 days holiday and the firm tells them you can't take it? You can't carry it over. I mean, and then people will leave because they'll get jinked off. Then the grass will be greener.
Very true.
So many things to talk about. So come on then, a quick snap. SDLT extension, good or bad thing?
Oh, I'm so 50. I can't give you an answer. I'm so 50-50 on that one, because I mean, if the 250 sort of bracket was 300, it may have really diluted it a bit more, but it isn't. It is what it is. I think it was to be expected. It's not a surprise. I think it's a good thing, probably overall, because I think people are more conditioned to everything now. But that has to be it. We are where we are now. The cards are dealt, kind of thing. We've just got to get on with it. I think in terms of lawyers, it's a case of, right, we know where we are. No more moaning. Let's just crack on with it. And in terms of what they see from the outside world in terms of criticism and everything else, my advice is to all lawyers out there, don't listen to it, because people are too quick to criticize. And if you think of the analogy, how often do we criticize the politicians and things like that, where realistically, do I know more than the politicians that are dealing with these matters at the moment? Of course not, but I'm still very quick to criticize them sometimes. So it's what's happening to us, isn't it? But don't take that criticism to heart, because it's coming from sources that don't work within the industry, that don't understand the process, that don't understand what we're going through at the moment.
I think what the SDLT announcement should make clear to people, actually, and again, perhaps the benefit that people haven't really thought about it, is the absolute fundamental importance of the housing market to UK PLC. It is the foundation upon which so much of what we do stands. And I think probably the driver was, the underlying economy is actually very weak. And if the housing market were to have tanked as well, that would have dragged everything down with it. There's so much.
He could not risk it. Yeah, no. He could never risk not extending it because of the implications of the crash. So
yeah,
it was always going
to. So, and I think, and in a way, I think it's a positive thing for us to remember what an important industry we're in that sense. Because quite often, I hate to say it, but quite often people do see estate agents and conveyancers as the lowest common denominator, and actually that's cobblers, because the other side of that coin is, we are the drivers of one of the most important parts of the economy, and I actually don't think that people should forget that, really.
Yeah, very much. It has, and if you want to try and put positive spins on it, there will be more clients that will be able to take advantage of the holiday now. So, trying to put positive spins on it, that will be the case. Hopefully it will be two cliff edges and they won't be as steep as they maybe were at the end of March. And of course, by having the end of March holiday, hopefully that's driven a lot of people to buy and take advantage of it already as well. Now people that have realised that they can go on, that there probably won't be as many. So I do think the cliff edge has got less steep, put it that way.
Yeah. Okay, Stu. Well, I think that was that went in directions we didn't expect, and you know, I hope that that's been interesting to people, and they're not too dull with us pontificate. You know, not too bored with us a couple of dullards pontificating.
I think the next one we've got to promise, haven't we? We should try and do a whole show without mentioning stamp duty or SDLT.
Oh,
Could we go a whole show without mentioning it?
No. Tempting. Watch. Make sure you're watching, folks. Okay, Stu. See you soon, lovey.
Okay.
Bye.
See ya. Bye.